Hillman sets a screen, rolls to the basket. Gray.
The moment the team transitioned into live drills, everything changed, but only if you were paying attention. It wasn't dramatic. No one gasped. No one stopped the drill. But the details started stacking up. The ball moved differently when it was in Clark's hands. Faster, yes, but not rushed. Cleaner. More intentional. Passing angles that weren't obvious suddenly became effortless. Space opened up in ways that didn't happen with anyone else. It wasn't just about skill, it was about control. The kind of control that doesn't shout, doesn't force itself into the spotlight, but quietly takes over the rhythm of the game. And the coaches noticed immediately. Their body language changed first. Subtle, but clear. Clipboards came out. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes locked in, not casually observing, but studying. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't skepticism. This was recognition. The kind that happens when something you didn't fully account for starts proving itself in real time. Assistants leaned closer. Notes were taken faster. Adjustments began, not formally, not announced, but instinctively. Because when a player changes the flow of a drill without being asked to, you either ignore it or you adapt to it. And in that moment, adaptation started winning. Players felt it too. Some adjusted quickly. They moved into space differently, trusted the timing, leaned into the new rhythm. Others hesitated. Not because they lacked ability, but because the game they were used to playing suddenly felt unfamiliar. When the offense doesn't run the way you expect, when the ball finds different hands at different times, it forces a decision. Do you adjust or do you resist? And not everyone made the same choice. Because beneath the surface, this wasn't just about basketball anymore. It was about identity. About roles that had been assumed, expectations that had been quietly built over years. When those expectations get challenged, especially suddenly, it doesn't just affect performance. It affects confidence. It affects perception. It raises questions no one wants to ask out loud. Who's leading this team? Who does the system actually revolve around? And what happens when the answer changes overnight? That's what made this moment so powerful. Clark didn't demand control. She didn't walk in expecting to take over. She simply played her game at a level that made the system bend around her. And when a system built on structure starts bending, it creates pressure. Not visible pressure, not the kind you can measure on a scoreboard, but internal pressure. The kind that builds quietly until it forces a reaction. And that reaction didn't come all at once. It built over time. Over possessions, over drills, over moments where the expected didn't happen. Where the ball didn't go where it should. Where the flow didn't follow the usual pattern. Each of those moments added weight. Each one pushed the balance a little further off center. By the time the session progressed into full 5-on-5 action, the shift was undeniable. This wasn't the same camp anymore. The hierarchy that once felt fixed now felt flexible, uncertain. And for some, that uncertainty wasn't something they were willing to accept. Because when you've spent years earning your place, building your role, waiting for your moment, watching it change in a matter of days isn't just frustrating. It's personal. And that's where everything started to unravel.
So the Wings that trailed by as many as 23. They're down by 30.
And this is where everything stopped being theoretical and became undeniable reality. The moment Caitlin Clark took control at point guard, it wasn't just another possession. It was a statement, a shift in gravity that everyone on that court could feel whether they wanted to admit it or not. First possession, she didn't rush, didn't overdribble, didn't try to prove anything with flash. She simply surveyed the floor with a calm that didn't match the intensity of the environment. 2 seconds, that's all it took. In those 2 seconds, she processed everything, her defender crowding her space, the weak side forward inching too far into the paint, the slight hesitation in the help defense. And then, without warning, she delivered a cross-court pass that cut through the defense like it wasn't even there. Not forced, not risky, just perfectly timed and precisely placed. The kind of pass that doesn't just lead to a bucket, it exposes the defense. The forward caught it in rhythm, took one controlled dribble, and finished with ease. No wasted movement. No panic. Just execution. And right there, something clicked not just on the scoreboard, but in the minds of everyone watching. Second possession, the defense adjusted. Of course they did. These weren't amateurs. They recognized what just happened and tried to shut it down immediately. They tightened up, shrunk the floor, took away the obvious passing lanes. This was the response Clark was supposed to struggle against. This was where most players would hesitate, reset, or force something uncomfortable. But Clark didn't react, she anticipated. She called for a double screen on the wing, but even before those screens were fully set, she had already read the next move. She saw the backdoor cut developing before it even fully existed, saw the defender's weight shift just enough to create a window. And in that split second, she delivered a bounce pass so perfectly placed it felt like the ball was guided by instinct rather than effort. Another easy bucket. Another defensive breakdown. Another moment where the game looked simpler in her hands than it did for anyone else on that floor. And then came the third possession, the one that removed all doubt. By now, the defender had changed strategy completely. No more pressure. No more overcommitment. Instead, they backed off, giving her space, almost daring her to prove she could hurt them from deep. It was a calculated risk, one that works against most players, especially in a setting like this. But against Clark, it was a mistake the moment it happened. She crossed half court with complete control, took 2 dribbles beyond the 3-point line, and without hesitation, without even a hint of doubt, she pulled up from well beyond standard range.
More points off of turnovers for the Aces.
25 feet. Clean release. Nothing but net. No rim, no adjustment, no second chance. Just a shot so confident and so precise that it didn't just score points, it sent a message. 3 possessions. 3 completely different reads. 3 entirely different solutions. And not a single wasted motion in any of them. That's when the gym truly started paying attention. Because this wasn't about highlights anymore. It was about consistency at a level that doesn't happen by accident. It was about control over the game's tempo, over spacing, over decision-making. And perhaps most importantly, it was about how everyone else on the floor started to look when she was running the offense. Players who were already elite suddenly looked sharper, more comfortable, more efficient. The ball found them in better positions. The spacing opened naturally. Shots came easier. It wasn't forced, it was created. And that's the difference between a good player and someone who elevates everyone around them. On the opposite side of that dynamic stood Paige Bueckers, an elite talent in her own right, someone who had dominated nearly every level she'd played at, someone used to being the center of attention, the focal point, the one who dictates the pace. And to be clear, Paige didn't suddenly become a lesser player in that moment. Her skill, her IQ, her ability, they were all still there. But what changed was the comparison. Because when Clark ran the offense, the game moved at a different speed. Not faster in a chaotic way, but faster in thought, in anticipation, in execution. Paige played fast. Clark played ahead. And that gap, subtle at first, became impossible to ignore as the session went on. By the time the drill ended, the scoreboard told part of the story, but the real story was in the reactions. Players walking back to the sideline, grabbing water, trying to process what they had just experienced. Coaches exchanging looks, assistants leaning in to share quiet observations. And then came the comment, the one that wasn't meant to be heard widely, but carried anyway. A simple sentence from one assistant coach to another, that's what we've been missing. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was honest. And honesty like that, in a setting like this, doesn't stay contained. It spreads. Players heard it. Coaches heard it. And Paige heard it. For just a moment, you could see it register. The subtle shift in expression, the pause, the internal reaction that never fully made it to the surface. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. She turned away, grabbed her water, and reset. But the tone had been set. And from that point forward, this camp was no longer just about evaluation. It was about competition in its most personal form. Day 2 didn't start with smiles. It didn't carry the same light energy as before. The atmosphere had changed, and everyone felt it. Conversations were shorter. Movements were sharper. Scrimmages became more physical, more intense. This wasn't about rhythm anymore, it was about proving something.
To the basket. Gray hits Atlanta's first three.
About reclaiming space, reasserting control, pushing back against what had started to take shape on day one. And at the center of all of it was Clark, still doing exactly what she had done before, running the offense, making the right reads, delivering under pressure. But now, the resistance was real. Defenders closed out harder. Contact increased. Passing lanes were contested more aggressively. Players tested her, not just physically, but mentally. They tried to disrupt her rhythm, to force mistakes, to speed her up. But the result didn't change. If anything, it highlighted the gap even more. Because while others were reacting to pressure, Clark absorbed it and kept operating at the same level of clarity. One sequence captured it perfectly. Full court pressure from Paige, tight, aggressive, designed to force a mistake early in the possession. It was the kind of defense that works against most players, the kind that creates rushed decisions, bad passes, turnovers. But Clark didn't rush. She stayed composed, crossed half court under control, and as the defense collapsed toward her, she didn't panic, she pivoted. A quick read, a precise pass to the weak side corner, and just like that, another open three. Another clean look. Another reminder that this wasn't about effort or intensity. It was about processing the game at a level that others simply weren't matching in that moment. And that's where things started to shift from competitive to personal. Because when performance alone doesn't change the outcome, frustration starts to build. And frustration looks for outlets. During a break, someone asked Clark about the increased physicality, about how she was handling the pressure. Her response was simple, calm, honest. She said it felt lighter than what she dealt with in college. It wasn't meant as a jab. It wasn't directed at anyone. It was just her perspective. But in a room full of professionals, players who had spent years grinding, competing, earning their place, that comment didn't land as neutral. It landed as dismissive, whether intended or not. And from that moment, the divide deepened. Paige didn't respond verbally. She didn't confront it. But her body language told the story. Arms crossed, focus shifted, energy redirected inward. Because now, this wasn't just about who was playing better. It was about respect, about recognition, about who the team was beginning to revolve around. And that's a shift that's hard to accept, especially when you've spent years preparing for your moment. By day 3, everything reached its peak. This was the day that mattered most. The day where evaluations became decisions. Where coaches looked beyond flashes and focused on consistency, leadership, control under pressure. And Clark didn't just perform, she dominated. Not in a flashy, over-the-top way, but in a controlled, surgical manner that left no room for doubt. She ran the offense like a veteran, called out defensive rotations before they happened, made reads that simplified the game for everyone around her. Teammates who had struggled earlier now looked confident. Bigs were getting easy finishes. Shooters found rhythm. Everything flowed through her, and everything worked. On the other side, the contrast became harder to ignore. Paige didn't play poorly, far from it. But the role had shifted. The ball wasn't in her hands the same way. The offense didn't run through her decisions. And for a player used to controlling the game, that adjustment isn't just difficult, it's disorienting. It changes how you see the floor, how you time your movements, how you stay engaged. You go from dictating to reacting. And that's a transition that doesn't happen overnight. The final scrimmage sealed it. Clark's team didn't just win, they controlled the game from start to finish. A double-digit margin. Efficient execution. Zero chaos. Clark finished with 8 assists, multiple deep threes, and most telling of all, no turnovers. Complete control. Every possession had purpose. Every decision had clarity. And with each successful play, the gap, whether real or perceived, felt wider. When it ended, the reactions said everything. Coaches pulled players aside for conversations, serious ones, focused ones, the kind that shape final decisions. Clark was in the middle of those discussions, engaged, central. And on the sideline, watching it all unfold, stood Paige. No conversation. No immediate feedback, just observation. And then, without a scene, without confrontation, without a word, she walked away. Straight to the locker room. Bag packed. Exit made. No one stopped her. Because by that point, everyone understood what had just happened. Not just in that moment, but over the course of 3 days that changed everything. And in that moment, when Paige walked out and the doors closed behind her, the silence inside that gym said more than any press conference ever could. No one chased her. No one called her back. No one even tried to create a scene out of it. Because deep down, every single person in that building already understood what had just happened. Not just the action itself, but the reason behind it. And the truth is, the easy explanation, the one people throw around quickly, is ego. That she couldn't handle watching someone else take control, couldn't accept the spotlight shifting away from her. But that explanation is too simple, too shallow for something this layered. Because what happened here wasn't just about pride. It was about identity, expectation, and the collision between what someone was told they would become and what reality suddenly demanded they accept. Paige Bueckers didn't just arrive at this camp as another talented player. She arrived as a symbol of the future. For years, she had been labeled as next. The next face. The next leader. The next generational star who would carry the weight of USA basketball forward. That narrative wasn't built overnight. It was carefully constructed through her performances, her accolades, her journey through the system. From a young age, she had done everything the right way. She followed the path. She showed up to the camps. She earned her recognition step by step. Coaches trusted her. Fans believed in her. Brands invested in her. Everything around her reinforced the same message. Your time is coming. Just wait for it. And this camp? This was supposed to be that moment. This was supposed to be where everything aligned, where preparation met opportunity, where years of patience turned into leadership, where she stepped into the role that had been waiting for her. But what no one accounted for, what no system, no structure, no long-term planning could fully prepare for, was someone arriving and changing the timeline completely. Caitlin Clark didn't just compete for a spot. She redefined the hierarchy in real time. She didn't follow the gradual process. She didn't ease into the system. She stepped in and immediately operated at a level that forced the system itself to adjust around her. And that's where everything broke. Because when you've been preparing for a role your entire life, when you've been told that role is yours, when you've built your identity around that expectation, and then suddenly, in a matter of days, you see that role shifting away from you, it's not just frustrating. It's disorienting. It forces you to confront something you're not ready to accept, that the game doesn't wait. It doesn't honor timelines. It doesn't reward patience just because it exists. It responds to performance, to impact, to who controls it in the present moment. And in that gym, in that camp, in those 3 days, Caitlin Clark controlled it. That doesn't diminish Paige's talent.
Goes with 3, launches the shot, got it!
Not even close. She's still one of the most skilled, intelligent, and capable players on the floor. But what became clear, painfully clear, is that there are levels to this game. And Clark was operating on one that demanded immediate adjustment from everyone else. When you're used to being the player others adjust to, that shift is hard to process. It challenges everything, your confidence, your role, your understanding of where you stand. And according to people close to the situation, Paige didn't leave in anger. She didn't storm out in frustration or create a scene. That's not what this was. This was a decision. A calculated one. She saw the direction things were heading. She saw how coaches were responding to Clark. She saw how the offense flowed differently, how the attention shifted, how the conversations changed. And in that moment, she faced a choice that athletes at the highest level sometimes have to make: stay and adapt to a role that no longer matches your expectations, or step away before that shift becomes permanent. And she chose to leave. Not because she couldn't compete, but because she understood what staying would mean. It would mean accepting a different position in the hierarchy. A secondary role. A supporting piece instead of the centerpiece. And for someone who had been built up as the future focal point for so long, that's not just a basketball adjustment. That's a personal one. What makes this even more telling is what happened, or rather, what didn't happen afterward. USA Basketball said nothing. No detailed explanation. No clarification. No official narrative to guide the conversation. Just silence. And in situations like this, silence isn't neutral. It's intentional. Because if there were a simple explanation, an injury, a scheduling conflict, a personal matter, it would have been shared. That's how these things usually work. But when the truth is complicated, when it risks exposing internal tension, when it challenges the image of stability and control, that's when organizations choose to stay quiet. And that silence created space for the real story to surface, not through official channels, but through conversations, through observations, through people who were there and couldn't ignore what they witnessed. Because moments like this don't disappear. They linger. They get talked about.
Time she sure did. A shot by Sammy Whitcomb.
They get analyzed. And eventually, they reshape how people understand what actually happened. At the center of all of it is something people still struggle to fully explain, the Caitlin Clark effect. Because what makes her impact so disruptive isn't just her skill. It's how effortlessly it shows up. She doesn't demand the ball. She doesn't force attention. She doesn't rely on theatrics or dominance in the traditional sense. She just plays the game the way it's supposed to be played, but at a level of timing, awareness, and processing speed that most players never reach. When you watch her, it looks simple. That's the illusion. But underneath that simplicity is a level of anticipation that changes everything. She sees plays before they develop. She understands spacing before it opens. She makes decisions before the defense even realizes there's a decision to be made. And when you're on the court with someone like that, you don't get to stay the same. You either rise to that level or you get exposed by it. There's no middle ground. That's what makes her presence so challenging. Not because she's louder or more aggressive, but because she raises the standard without saying a word. And that kind of pressure affects everyone differently. Some players adapt quickly. They lean into it, elevate their game, find ways to fit into that rhythm. Others struggle, not because they lack ability, but because the adjustment requires a shift in mindset, in role, in identity. And for Paige, that adjustment came all at once. Not gradually. Not over months or seasons. But in 3 days. That's the real gap, not talent, but timing. Clark has already spent years operating as the primary engine of every team she's been on. She understands what it means to control a game at the highest level. Paige is still navigating that transition, still finding consistency after setbacks, still building toward that version of herself. And when those two timelines collided in the same space, the difference became visible. So, what does this mean moving forward? That's the question USA Basketball now has to answer. Because this isn't just about one camp or one player leaving early. It's about a shift in how the team might need to operate going forward. Do they build around the player who clearly elevates everyone else right now? Or do they try to maintain balance, to preserve relationships, to avoid creating friction among other elite talents? Do they adjust their system to fit this new reality? Or do they try to hold on to the structure that's defined them for so long? The truth is, they don't have as much flexibility as it might seem.
Banks it in!
Because when a player demonstrates that level of control, that level of impact, that level of consistency, you don't ignore it. You can delay it. You can manage it. But eventually, you have to acknowledge it. And if the goal is winning at the highest level, especially looking toward future competitions like the Olympics, decisions have to be based on performance, not expectation. That means difficult conversations. It means redefining roles. It means accepting that the future might not look the way it was originally planned. And for players like Paige, it presents a new challenge, not whether they belong, but how they fit into a system that's evolving faster than expected. She's still talented enough to be a major part of that future. That hasn't changed. But the terms might be different. The role might be different. And accepting that is one of the hardest transitions any elite athlete has to make. Because at this level, it's never just about ability. It's about adaptation. This story, at its core, isn't about failure or weakness or even conflict. It's about what happens when the game itself makes a decision. When it reveals, in the clearest way possible, who is controlling it in the moment. Basketball doesn't follow narratives. It doesn't protect expectations. It responds to execution, to timing, to impact. And in that gym, over those 3 days, the game made its choice clear. Paige's decision to leave wasn't about running away from competition. It was about recognizing a reality she wasn't ready to accept yet. And that's human. That's understandable. But it's also part of the process of this level. Because every player, no matter how talented, eventually faces a moment where they have to decide how they respond to change. USA Basketball can frame this however they want. They can stay silent. They can move forward without addressing it directly. But the people who were there, the ones who saw it unfold possession by possession, already know what happened. And more importantly, they know what it means. Because once a shift like this happens, once the hierarchy bends, once the game reveals a new center, it doesn't just go back to the way it was. It moves forward. And whether everyone is ready for it or not, that's exactly what this moment represents. A turning point. One that made it impossible to ignore who the game is starting to revolve around now. And that reality isn't going anywhere.